Do not be alarmed. It's just a couple of guys. Who are these guys? Ray Regina, beloved former mayor of St. Charles, lifetime educator, and Pat Crimmins, a Geneva lawyer, but he's actually okay. From Elgin to Aurora, from Naperville to Elburn, these guys are gonna talk everything. So, here's Pat and Ray.
Hello, friends. Welcome to Just a Couple of Guys, now in our third season, with my co-host, Pat Crimmins.
Happy to be here, Ray. How you doing?
Good.
Good.
Yours truly, Ray Regina, and we're here in studio for the second of our three-part countywide race podcast, where we're interviewing the two candidates for three different offices. We've already done the first one, and that was the county board chair.
Right.
Today, we're doing the state's attorney's office, and tomorrow, at least we'll be taping tomorrow, the candidates for the judgeship of the 4th Sub-Circuit.
That's correct, which is St. Charles, Geneva, Batavia.
All
Mostly
right.
St. Charles.
Back to today, we have the state's attorney herself, Jamie Mosser, and she will be here. And then we'll follow that up with an interview with her opponent, the Republican candidate, Andrew 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐞. And he will talk about his plans for the office.
Yeah,
and Pat, I was just going to say, speaking of the state's attorney, this is something you lived and breathed for 13 odd years.
That's right.
As a prosecutor. So I expect you to be burrowing in.
Well, yeah, and all three of these forums or podcasts we're going to do are going to have a little overlap. What the county board does affects
Right.
the state's attorney, and the judges always are involved.
County budget,
Yeah, right.
it leaks down to the specific
And so
offices.
obviously as a lawyer, I'm going to have some relationships with the state's attorney and the challenger here. I should disclose them in the name of journalistic integrity.
Well, that would be good.
Yeah, I mean, my ex-wife works for the state's attorney's office. She's a high-ranking prosecutor there, and I know Miss Mosser. I have cases in front of the state's attorney's office. And of course, Mr. 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐞, I used to work with. He was my supervisor.
Is that right?
One of my supervisors when I was at the state's attorney's office. So with that, I don't think it's going to affect my ability to conduct this podcast, but I wanted to let the people know.
That's fair. And on that point, we obviously have two candidates who have prosecutorial experience. Madam State's Attorney, Jamie Mosser, is the state's attorney for the county and is completing her first term and running for re-election.
Right.
And Mr. 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐞 has been, he currently is not, but has been in the office as a prosecutor.
Correct. And I wanted to say I'll probably be a little tough on Miss Mosser talking about the office, in that there are a variety of restorative justice programs that I'm going to talk to her about, just to get her to talk about those programs and kind of advocate for them.
We're going to have all of that after a commercial break from one of our fine sponsors. So don't go anywhere. You stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay, we're back with Madam State's Attorney Jamie Mosser and, of course, Ray Rogina, and we're here to talk a little bit about the election that's coming up. November, what's the date?
5th,
And do you have the number of days yet?
41 days left.
Yes, and hours, of course, you got that?
No, not the hours. That would drive me crazy at that point.
Absolutely. Well, I understand. It's a fatiguing time, and we appreciate your time being here. We want to give the viewers and all the fans of Just a Couple of Guys, the podcast, an idea of the candidates that are running for certain offices, and this is one of them. We did the county board previously, doing the state's attorney today, and I think we're doing judges in the 4th Sub-Circuit tomorrow.
That's correct.
Correct. All right, Ms. Mosser, I'm going to ask you a little bit about yourself so that for people who don't know you or know enough about you, you can give them some information, your biography, your past employment. I know you're the incumbent state's attorney in Kane County, but obviously you had a life before that. What did you do? Your education, and of course we want your website information so that people can read the 85 pages about your life and time.
Of course. So, first of all, thank you both for having me on. I do appreciate it. Any opportunity that I can get to talk about this, to hopefully earn votes, is exactly what I want to do. So I was born and raised here in Illinois. I went to school at Illinois State University, majored in political science, minored in philosophy.
No wonder she was staring at that red blue over there.
Exactly.
Disclosure.
Disclosure,
ISU.
yep, ISU.
Okay.
Quickly, I'd always wanted to be a lawyer, so I knew I was going to go to law school. So I went to DePaul. I graduated with my Juris Doctor. I also had a certificate in criminal law because all I've ever wanted to do was be a prosecutor. And so I actually moved down to Louisiana for 2 years where I was an assistant district attorney. So for your viewers, that's the exact same thing as an assistant state's attorney. They just title it differently in the state.
And they call them parishes down there as
Yes.
opposed to counties.
And
Correct.
the weather's different.
Much different.
Yes.
Kind of worse crime also.
Who was the state's attorney at that time?
The DA was 𝐊𝐿𝐴 Sr.
That's right.
But he had just left and it became Eddie Jordan. So 𝐊𝐿𝐴 was there for 30 years.
You know, we met him. We were at a seminar, John Barsani and my wife and people were down there for a homicide seminar
Oh,
and met Mr. Connick.
okay.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. It was an interesting time.
Yes,
So,
it was.
I was down there for 2 years. I mostly practiced in juvenile law. Absolutely loved it. I had the best supervisor who really trained me how to be a good prosecutor. Did 2 homicides while I was down there as a brand new attorney, which is terrifying. Moved back here because this is where my family is. Applied to every state's attorney's office within a 50-mile radius, and Kane County is the one that offered me the job. So then I was there for 10 years, pretty much every division except for civil. And then my best part was I made the head of the domestic violence division for my last 5 years, which truly is my passion.
Who hired you?
That would have been John Barsani.
John Barsani was the state's attorney at that time. Now, if people want to look at your website, and your website obviously would have more biographical information, more information about your policies and your statistics through the
Absolutely.
office, where can we find that?
It's www.mosser, so .mosser, MOSSER for Kane.com.
MosserforKane.com.
And we're good about flashing that up on the screen.
Flashing,
Most
yes.
of the time. let me ask you, you finished your first term, or you're finishing your first term now as state's attorney, so the natural question to follow up here is simple. Why do you seek re-election?
So I'm not done.
All right.
Part of why I ran in the first place is I wanted to get back into being a prosecutor because I had left. I was in private practice. I did legal aid, but I missed being a prosecutor. And what I wanted to do was to bring true criminal justice reform to Kane County, but in the right way. We see a lot of bad policies, a lot of bad laws, which we're obviously going to talk about, that affect the rest of us that are coming out of Cook County. What I wanted to do was make sure that we were treating people the right way in Kane County, and I felt like I could do that. And so over the last 4 years, I've implemented a lot of programming that helped get people out of our system, get them access to resources and treatment. But I'm not done. 4 years is not enough to do all of the things that we need to for this community, so I'm still ready to go.
So if you had 3 priorities for a second term, what might they, I'll say 3, but you can give me as many as you want. Priorities for the second term, what would they be?
So the first one is I believe that we need to have a human trafficking unit. And so we have applied for some grant funding through some organizations because we see human trafficking is on the rise. I mean, in St. Charles.
We've had
recently,
incidents, yes.
Yes. And it's just going to get worse, especially with the migrants coming into the communities when they don't have any resources or access, or people just are taking advantage of them. So that's my first big priority. And thankfully, my first assistant, Christine Bear, I always give her a shout out, is an expert in human trafficking prosecution cases. And so she and I have been really working together to get that.
And you feel that people in general, the populace, are naive about that? Kind of thing?
Yes. Because you don't think it's going to happen here. You think it's going to happen by borders, or you think it's going to happen, in other countries. But it absolutely happens here, and because we have 88 and 90 going through our county, that is an easy way that people are able to be found and trafficked.
Okay, how about a couple of other priorities?
So the other priority is I really want to create something on the second floor, and I don't really want to go into too much detail for everybody, but I want there to be a bigger focus on both domestic violence and DUI in a different way than we've done it before. So the way our courthouse currently is we prosecute all misdemeanor domestic violence cases in one courtroom, all DUI cases in another courtroom, and felonies for those go everywhere. The problem is if for domestic violence, when it gets more serious or you continue to do it, we're not getting to the root of the issue. So we need prosecutors who can specialize in this, and defense attorneys who know what they're doing for motions, and even a judge to move these cases in the right way. The same thing goes for a DUI. A first-time DUI is usually a mistake, but when you get your second, your third, your fourth, we have to be able to intervene better. And those are the most prevalent of all of the cases that we have. And so that's one of the things that I want to be able to is get that specialty across our entire second floor, and that's what I've been working with our chief judge on.
Okay.
And so the last thing that I would really like to do is I'm going to continue to advocate for the people at the state's attorney's office and throughout the county to have pay parity. We did a really great job recently of being able to do that, and I'm very proud because we've stopped losing employees hand over fist. Because they can go to DuPage County as a starting attorney and get $10,000 more than they would in my office. But that was only after I got significant raises. When I started, assistant state's attorneys get paid $59,000. Now imagine all the law school debt, all of the other debt, just wanting to live in Kane County. I was able to get that increased to $75,000, and I did that for support staff too.
Would you say that at the current schedule, you're still behind?
Yes, very much so.
Finally, before I go back to Pat here, looking back at your first term, about what you would consider as the chief, 3 successes that you had.
Well, going towards the money again, being able to get that much for all of those individuals, and it was across the board, everybody in the office. Not for me, I'm paid by the state. This was truly an initiative for the people to make sure that they were supported and that they don't have to have second jobs, because I have attorneys who have second jobs, and that's rather embarrassing. So that's one thing that was for the benefit of them. My collaborative diversion program, which used to be called pre-arrest diversion, it's the only one in the state of Illinois. I'm very proud of that initiative because it works with police officers. An officer comes upon somebody committing a crime, low-level offenses, because of mental health, substance use, or lack of resources, and instead of putting them through the traditional criminal justice system, they send them to our case managers who are grant funded. And then they help them get out of whatever issue it is that's helping them. And we've helped a lot of people just in this initiative. It saves money for taxpayers because you're not putting them through the criminal justice system. And this program shows that 58%, it's more likely 58% time for a person going through collaborative diversion to not commit another crime versus somebody who goes through the traditional legal system. And then my last one I'm super proud of, but that is our child exploitation unit. And so this is a joint initiative with the sheriff because I was approached pretty early on to show how little we're investigating and prosecuting child pornography cases. And part of that is Aurora and Elgin absolutely have the investigators to do it, and they do a great job with it. But what I found out when they showed us the tracking of who's downloading child porn, the majority of the child porn, or the city that has the most downloaded child porn, is St. Charles. St. Charles doesn't have the resources to adequately investigate this. So we went to the county board, got funding for 2 investigators who I employ, a forensic analyst, and a prosecutor just to go after these cases. And we've pretty much tripled what we've done in the past in getting these people off of our streets. And so I'm incredibly proud of that because it shows that we're proactively trying to figure that out. Sorry if that was me. I know, that's tacky.
That's a violation. As I check my phone.
Yes.
All right, Pat.
Well, obviously, somebody has to kind of ask you the hard questions
Yes.
about what you just said.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's going to be me. So, first, big fan of the pay parity, but obviously you would concede the fact that DuPage County has a greater revenue base than Kane County does,
Yes.
certainly. Greater population.
Yes.
And at this point, compared to when I was in the office, a greater percentage of violent crime.
I would disagree with
Per
that. I think
capita.
we have a greater.
Well, I'm not seeing that, but anyways, we'll let that go. So so the pay parity or the pay challenge in comparison with DuPage County is not necessarily equal, I don't think. I think given their situation. In terms of your second floor initiative, can you explain that a little bit more as to what it would be and what it is now?
Sure. So what it is now is we have two misdemeanor courtrooms that one is DV, one is DUI, and the other one is just a general felony courtroom. What we've been proposing and working with the chief judge on is having all three of those courtrooms just handle only domestic violence and DUI cases, and that would be both felonies and misdemeanors. And so what you do is you'd have people who are knowledgeable specifically about those cases, who understand the cycle of violence, who understand addiction issues, who understand when we need to escalate resources for somebody. In addition to that, you don't have to worry about somebody having to go from this type of a case to that type of a case. They know the case law that's involved in all of this. You have both felony assistants and misdemeanor assistants in the same courtroom, so the training is even better because the felony assistants can help the misdemeanor assistants. So overall, we'll get cases through the system quicker. We will have people have much more consistent offers, and frankly, we'll be able to figure out how to get to the root of these particular issues because that's the cycle we see over and over again, especially with domestic violence and multiple DUI offenses.
Okay, the questions that I would have there are that the DUI person is evaluated by a professional in terms of their risk assessment, right? So whether a prosecutor has experience in DUI cases or a judge has presided over DUI cases, the deference really is to the professional that assesses the defendant, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then with the domestic violence, the same type of thing. They would be sentenced or at least given some kind of sentence that would involve anger management or domestic violence therapy, that kind of thing. So again, you're deferring to the professionals.
Correct, but we're expanding it. Because the way that we did it in prosecution before, if you're a DUI offender, we're just saying, okay, level 1, 2, or 3 counseling. If you're a domestic abuser, we're saying go to do partner abuse. Well, that doesn't ultimately get to what the problem is in a lot of these cases because that's when we see the repeat offenses.
Well, so you're suggesting that if Timmy hits his wife, Sally, when he's drunk, that maybe he needs some alcohol counseling in addition to the domestic
Correct,
counseling.
yes.
Yeah, I think that's always been a part of it, whether it's not implemented or effectively implemented. I can't answer that, but
Right.
Usually as a defense attorney, I would say, my guy was drunk at the time, so let's do some alcohol stuff, because that's really treating the core of the problem, which is he's probably a sweet guy when he's sober, but when he's drunk, he might get a little angry.
Unless there's something else even underlying it more. And so what we've done is a series of, we're researching trauma. The majority of the people who come through our court system are there because there was a lot of trauma that they've experienced.
Right.
And if you don't get to the root of the trauma, then you're going to keep drinking. And thus, it doesn't matter if I give you alcohol treatment because you're still going to drink because your trauma hasn't been addressed.
I understand. Now, there would be some out there who might question whether it's your job to engage in the psychotherapy of defendants as opposed to allowing the defense attorney or the professional do it. How do you address that question that the taxpayers might have as to why is she doing that? Her job is to prosecute. Let's let the people who advocate for the defendant worry about the defendant and let the professionals assess.
Because that's my job. My job is to represent everybody in the state of, or in the county of Kane, and that includes looking out for the best interests of the defendant in these cases.
Okay.
Which means if I can bring better services and treatment in that's going to get to the root of their issue, I'm not going to see them again. It's better for them and it's better for their families.
Okay. One more question. Human trafficking you mentioned. How many human trafficking cases have we had in your first term?
In my first term, we're prosecuting 4 defendants for human trafficking now. We've seen a number of cases that should have been investigated for human trafficking, but instead it was investigated for illegal massage parlors. And we've been working with our police departments to realize that when you're trafficking a person, it may look like it's prostitution, when in reality, it's human trafficking. So we have not had as many as I think we are actually experiencing here in Kane County, but that's why we need investigators who know what they're doing. And it would be my investigators who would then partner with police departments and the federal government to be able to properly investigate this so we could prosecute it.
I always remember when we were driving on vacation to get to our destination, the kids were always in a hotel at or near a major thoroughfare.
Yes.
And I said, don't ever leave the room.
Right.
You know, and then you find your kid wandering down to the ice machine.
Well, she makes a great point. My 2 terms as mayor, we closed down 6 different massage establishments, and the underlying current was always the question that you're bringing up, and it is, well, how much of this is human trafficking going on? And you know, it's certainly a valid point. I want to get to the campaign itself and talk a minute about the question, favorite 2 questions that Pat and I like to ask candidates, and that is, could you talk about your opponent in a positive light, something you like about him, and then conversely, something that you clearly know, perhaps because of the campaign trail, that you 2 are at opposite sides on?
Sure. I like his dedication that he's given to 𝐊𝐿𝐵𝐿, where he lives. He's on the 708 board, so it's clear that he wants to help in his community. And oftentimes I think we find politicians get in here and then suddenly they're like, I love my community. And clearly he loved that beforehand. So I think that's very admirable. I think the biggest difference between him and I is my belief on criminal justice reform versus his belief in criminal justice reform.
Well, yeah, reform is an interesting topic because there are people who believe that reform is probation, supervision, prison, jail, that kind of thing, versus kind of this restorative justice concept, a more progressive concept where let's get at the root of the problem, like you described earlier. Some of these programs that you do have existed before your term.
Yes,
started.
absolutely.
Yeah, but you've added some. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've added?
Sure. So in our deferred prosecution arena, which has been around for 25 plus years, one of the programs that I added was a first-time weapons offender program. We in Illinois have a probation already for it. It's a specialized probation that allows a person who is possessing a gun illegally, not using it on someone, but possessing it, to have a special probation that eventually results in no conviction if they do everything that they're supposed to do. When I took office, we had a number of people who were charged with unlawful use of a weapon, which is a class 4 felony, which doesn't have any use of it, it just has possession of it. The majority of these individuals owned the gun legally, had a FOID card, but didn't have a conceal and carry license. They were just transporting it back and forth illegally. Now that's a huge thing to have a lawful gun owner now suddenly have a felony conviction. But you can't just let it go.
Let me interrupt you. Isn't it better to go down to Springfield and say, why don't you change the law with respect to this type of a scenario? We think it's too harsh. Maybe we should give them a different type of penalty, as opposed to you doing it. Are you confident that this gun diversion program would withstand voter scrutiny?
Yes, I am.
You are? Okay. Based on what?
Well, we have an 85% success rate with this. We take the offenders who are doing this and usually have them talk to the police officers, so officers can say it's incredibly dangerous when you do something like this. It creates a situation that doesn't have to happen. We have them do community service hours, and frankly, there's program fees for that. So we've raised money that has gone back to the county to be able to supplement all of this. And again, these are individuals who, because they don't have a conviction on their record, can continue to be productive members in our society, keep their job, keep their home, stay stable.
And possess a gun,
and possess a gun legally.
which they've already shown that they didn't do it responsibly in the first place.
Transporting, not possessing.
Well, the semantics.
Yes.
I'm-
But we're lawyers, so that's what we do.
Well, that's what we do, but that, the great fear is that people that aren't responsible will take advantage of that problem.
We do have a very big screening portion of it. They actually have to come in. In the beginning, it was meeting with me because I wanted to put my seal of approval. I have one of my attorneys who's in charge of it that does our gun and gang. We check to make sure they don't have a gang history, that they don't have other criminal records, that they weren't doing anything stupid with the gun during that time period.
Right.
And we also help them get educated on how to be legal when carrying it. And
But
that's another big thing.
You would agree that not all violence comes from gang members and
Correct.
people that wouldn't necessarily sustain your scrutiny. It can come from anybody. And,
Yes.
and
I mean, a
so
domestic abuser, for example.
Crimmins doesn't agree with this policy at all. That's for sure. Whatever that's worth.
I thought we were doing editorials.
No. I'm advocating for the voter out there. Now, the other thing that you talked about was this collaborative diversion. It's
Yes.
now known as, but it was pre-arrest diversion.
Correct.
Why are we involved in that at all?
Well, so by statute, we're supposed to have deflection programs. Deflection programs are not what we do after a person is arrested in our court system. It's supposed to be preventing them from being arrested in the first
The
place.
state's attorney's office is involved in that process?
Yes.
It's not just the police department that utilizes their discretion,
It should be both.
but you could defer to the police department and let them decide whether they're going to charge somebody. Instead, you're getting involved in the process of telling the police not to charge somebody?
No. We partner with them. So,
Okay.
police officer, let's just use this as an example. Approaches a person because they're doing an investigation or whatever it is. This person maybe is intoxicated. Maybe they could be arrested. Maybe they have drugs on them and they find it. Maybe it's a retail theft and they say it's because of these reasons. Now, again, through the traditional legal system, you could arrest them, hold them overnight. They'll go to first appearance court. It's not a detainable offense, so they'll be released, and then they'll spend months in court till we get to a disposition on all of it. Or that police officer could see, because most of the time they know these individuals and have dealt with them multiple times, sees that maybe it's an ongoing addiction issue, mental health issue, homelessness, whatever it is, and they want to try something else. This is where the officer then gets a choice. The officer can not arrest by using his discretion and referring him to us. This is giving them what they've done before because officers have chosen not to arrest. We're just providing the service piece of it to them.
Okay.
So it's a partnership. It's not me telling them not to do it.
Are we utilizing taxpayer dollars to engage in the process of not arresting people?
Right now we're using grant funds primarily for it. There is one person in the whole initiative
What's
who
the word
is...
primarily mean?
Well, there's one person
Okay.
who I employ through my office that is
Right.
through my general fund. Everyone else is grant funded.
I understand.
We had the county board chair here and her opponent last week, and the conversation came around to the referendum that the county
Yes.
board has put on the docket for the spring, which would amount to an increase in the county sales tax. She did indicate that a majority of the referendum was scheduled to support public safety. I guess the obvious question, which I think I know the answer already, is do you support that referendum? And then the follow-up would be, but if it fails, then what?
Right.
So perhaps take us through both of those.
Absolutely. So I do support that referendum. The entirety of it has to go to public safety because the way that the law is around that particular, you can either do it for public safety, mental health, buildings. And so this one they've chosen to do for public safety. I support it because this is taxing if somebody comes into Kane County or lives in Kane County and goes to a store and buys a purse, you're getting a small percentage or a penny taken off of that, which goes into it.
Yeah.
Most of our counties that surround us have this tax that they've utilized. Now, the one bad thing about it is it does tax gas if people are going to go purchase tax, and that's difficult. But I've advised the county board that we can do an equivalent reduction in the gas tax so that the voters or the people are not seeing that when they go to the pumps because it's already expensive.
Plus here, minus over here.
Exactly. So it can balance out. But in public safety, all that we've seen is that there have been an increase in what we need to do, especially with unfunded mandates. And the problem is you can't say, I want less police officers, I want less prosecutors, I want less if you still want your community to be safe. So I support it for that reason. If it doesn't pass, then this is up to the county board to figure out where they're going to increase their revenue. When I first came into office, because I asked for significant raises my first year, my second year, and finally got it in my third year, I proposed 4 different ways that they could raise revenue. They have had this for this entire time, and now it's finally going up for this one. Can I cut my staff? I do not believe I can. We have assessed this back and forth. I have one of the most brilliant CFOs who works for me. You guys may know him, Terry Hunt. He was our former auditor. We go back and forth with the budget, looking at what we can do, how we can be good stewards of it. I've come in under budget every single year that I've had this. And so I don't think we can lessen what we have in public safety, so they need to make it a priority.
And for the record, and I looked at my tax bill on this, the county tax rate itself has fallen
Yes.
the last 4 years. And Madam Chairman did say that there's a deficit. Pat, was it somewhere in the neighborhood of
$28 million.
$28 million?
Yes, I remember it well.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a shortfall to make up, and part of that obviously the state's attorney's office.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a prosecutor in the 90s, when there was blood in the streets, gang wars and things like that, I said $100 a house, property tax increase, public safety. That was my little, and I advocated for that, and everybody said, "Crimmins, you're crazy." And that's back when prosecutors were making $40,000 a year and that kind of thing. So the idea of it's great. It's just that presupposes that the offices are running an efficient budget. You claim that you are. Other offices within the county would claim that they are. But at some point, I think every office could be challenged for that.
Of course.
Things like that. So. You're prepared, if it doesn't pass, to do what you have to do. Even though and I respect your answer to the question, you don't feel you can cut, but you may have to.
Correct.
Where would you cut?
Well, so here's the thing. Again, I don't think we can, because the services that we provide, like deferred prosecution, that's statute. This is what we're supposed to be doing. What I have done as the state's attorney is I've sought other revenue sources. So recently I was awarded a grant from Senator Linda Holmes for $1 million because I went down to Springfield understanding we were going to have budget issues. I went there because I knew this was going to happen, and I wanted to be able to say, if something has to happen, I can still maintain public safety because I asked for money for somewhere else.
Let me ask this question regarding the budget. What was your budget when you walked in the door?
It was a little over $10 million.
What is it today?
$18 million.
It's $8 million. That's 80% of your previous budget?
Yes.
Increase?
Well, I don't do math, but sure.
That's what I'm throwing it out there. How many employees did you have when you walked in the door?
154.
How many lawyers?
Oh, about half that.
Half that. And how about now?
I have 196.
Okay. So increof 30,
Oh
40?
my God, stop asking me these. Put those in your questions and I'll be prepared for this.
I understand. Part of what we wanted to talk a little bit about today was supervisors. Now, because I'm so old, I've been through many elections in this county, many for state's attorney, and I recall one election being about, he might be a trial lawyer and a great prosecutor, but I know technology and I can make the office more efficient. That was one election. And then the idea of, I can run a more efficient office with less. Where are we on the concept of the idea that can be done? Can we be efficient with less at this point?
With less, no. I mean, are we efficient?
Right.
Yes, I believe we are. I restructured the office. So talking about supervisors, there's me, then there's my brilliant first assistant. I got to say that again. Twice, yeah. And then from there, I have 3 chiefs. I have a chief of my civil division, I have a chief of the criminal division, and I have a chief of our post-conviction unit. And so under that, there are deputy chiefs. And then we have restructured everybody into vertical prosecution units on the criminal side. So I have a major crimes unit, guns and gangs, drugs, domestics, DUI, because then that's a case type that they prosecute.
Right.
And that's more like the chair system that
Right.
we had. So the team lead for that is essentially like the first chair. So you have people who can go to a knowledgeable individual, but the supervision of it then is the chiefs and the deputy chiefs.
So how many supervisors do we have currently in the office?
Well, so if you look at it by what a supervisor is, you have the 3 chiefs, there
Yeah.
are 2 deputy chiefs, and the rest are team leads.
Okay, so you're not considering a team lead as a supervisor for purposes of this question?
Correct, yes.
Okay, all right.
We're getting short on time, and I want to make sure we
I have a
get this-
question follow-up here, but
Okay.
it's important. My experience and the experience of many people that do practice criminal law is that there's too much deference to supervisors.
Okay.
Wherein you ask a local prosecutor, ASA, whatever, can we do this, that, like, I have to ask so-and-so, we have to get a continuance. And what that does, in my opinion, is it kind of thwarts the progress of the lawyer.
Absolutely.
Because all the lawyer ends up doing is parroting what he or she's told to do. Do you think we have too many supervisors? Do you think that policy can be looked at where people have more authority to look at things so that they can grow as an attorney?
Correct. And so I have been trying to make sure that people understand they have discretion in my office.
Right.
Because I agree, because I was in the office at some point when
Right.
we had 0 discretion, and how do you ever learn from there?
Right.
So my attorneys have discretion. The team leads are supposed to be there for guidance and
Right.
questions. And I hate that situation because I had that when I practiced as a defense attorney.
Right.
Well, I can't make that decision. It seems really simple. Let's just take care of it.
And to be fair, a lot of times I think the prosecutor relies on that. It's not an excuse of some sort.
But then they really, truly don't learn.
Right.
So, no, we have much more discretion in the office. Even the traffic attorneys, brand new attorneys, have more discretion to do things.
Good.
They just have a team lead who is there to guide them through everything.
Right. When I was there, the team lead or the supervisor would be, what do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me why.
Right.
That kind of thing. There weren't questions like, you're going to do this.
Right.
It's going to be. And then, Mr. Barsani was asked that question, and I'd say, this is what I want to do. And he'd say, go do it. That's supervision as far as I'm concerned.
And we do try to do a healthy amount of that. Every now and again, I like to do that. So as an example, we had a domestic case where I believe that the wrong person was arrested. And so
That's tough in a domestic.
It is tough in a domestic.
Okay.
And so I sent it to the attorney who was in charge and the supervisor. I said, I want you to review it. Should we go forward with these charges and why? And so we did it as a practice and making sure that they could talk it out too.
Right. That's good.
Pat and I spent almost a year prior to the passage of the Safety Act railing against it. We make no bones about that. It was passed, and it's a year in place already. And I read an interesting article in the Daily Herald quoting you, quoting the State's Attorney Berlin in DuPage County, and quoting State's Attorney Reinhardt in Lake County, saying that from your perspective, overall, it has to have been somewhat successful. And we didn't get a lot of specifics, but there were points made. Then I get a email or whatever you want to call it from my representative Ugasti, and he says, and I quote, the implementation of the Pretrial Fairness Act has sparked significant concern among citizens and law enforcement. The act has left communities vulnerable and undermined the authority of the courts to hold dangerous criminals accountable for their crimes. Of course, it goes on. He never quotes any statistics in here, but he seems to rail against it. I'd like to have you comment, just for the audience, about the Safety Act in general.
So I ran on criminal justice reform, and as this was passed in January of 2021, I was really excited to sit down and read it. 611 pages. I sat down with a glass of wine, possibly several after I penned a letter in objection to the Safety Act. I was the first Democrat that was out there saying, absolutely no, this will make our community unsafe. As a result of that letter, I then was invited to be a part of a group of individuals who argued as to why we could fix it, because the concepts within are great. The writing, not great at all.
That happens in Springfield.
That it does more often than people know. And so myself and State's Attorney Berlin, so Democrat, Republican, lockstep the entire time. There were 100 of us who were in opposition. 2 counties were not. I'm sure nobody is surprised by Cook, and then the other one was Lake, of course.
What a surprise.
I know. And so what we ended up doing over the next couple of years is we drafted trailer bills. So in law enforcement, with the Sheriff's Association, the Chiefs Association, the Illinois State Police, and the State's Attorneys Association, we fixed great portions of this. So when the Pretrial Fairness Act portion came in, it was the worst timing you could ever do because it was the gubernatorial race and everybody used this in their race. Everybody lied about it. When somebody said that the doors were going to swing open and all the criminals were going out, that wasn't going to happen. When
That's
somebody
what it
said,
sounds like he's saying here in this
Alleged criminal.
Sir.
and the other side too, when they're saying judges have all the discretion still, that still remains not true. Because the thing is, we still have to fix it. I'm very proud of the work that State's Attorney Berlin and I did because I don't think the Pretrial Fairness Act would be successful now if the fixes hadn't been made in the way that we did it. Expanding the list of detainables, fixing things with warrants, making sure a judge could still issue a warrant, frankly. And so that's what we have still, is that there's this rhetoric that was put out there because of politics, when it's actually, in my opinion, holding more people. Our studies show that, our statistics show that we are holding more people in jail now than before because the bad guys can't get out. The ones with money cannot get out. And we weren't holding the other individuals who weren't a danger because we were doing what we were supposed to do in King County.
I don't recall bad guys having money. When did this
They
change?
have a lot of it.
I want to. I'm careful about the time here. We're getting close to the end. I'm going to ask another question dealing with something that happened here recently. And I prefaced my remarks by saying that I know that when I was mayor in St. Charles, our police work with your office very well. I know that the police up and down the valley, for the most part, works with the state's attorney. We, as you said earlier, you use the word partner. Very, very important point to make about partnerships with the police and the state's attorney's office. Having said that, we now have this flap in Aurora that made all over the papers and the press with the Aurora Police and the Sheriff's Office. And I'm not necessarily wanting you to comment specifically on that, but I'd rather you comment in general about the importance of all police forces up and down the valley working with your office to make sure we don't have faux pas, if you will, in law enforcement.
Right. So I consider myself to be a partner with every single one in law enforcement because without them, I can't do my job. Now we're going to disagree, and there are some of my programs that law enforcement disagrees with. There's some that they agree with. There's some of my charging decisions or offers that I make, but I talk to them. I communicate with them as much as I possibly can because that's the better thing, so we can understand each other. When things like this are happening, it distracts from the good work that we're all doing because we all want to seek justice at the end. So when things like this happen, I attempt to mediate, but I also have to stay out of certain things because what they're fighting out over is something I'm reviewing, and I have to independently review it in my office.
Okay. You had one final question, I think, on criminal reform before we go to our final statement.
No, when we're talking about this race for state's attorney, my guess is, without knowing absolutely the facts, having not been to the NAACP forum, that kind of thing, but I would guess that Mr. 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐞, being a Republican, is running against this reformative justice program or programs that you have enacted and you're promulgating. Any other issues between the two of you outside of that you could talk about for us?
No, I think that's the biggest difference between him and I, is that I want to find that balance in being a prosecutor, because there are people that just have to go to prison because they are in danger, but there are the majority. Bad guy goes, exactly. But the majority of the people who come through our system come for a reason. We know mass incarceration failed because we've sent plenty of people to prison only for them to come out and it happens all over again. So we can either keep doing it because it's a great tagline and it sounds wonderful, I'm going to be law and order and I'm going to be justice, when in reality this is the justice, and this is where the majority of the prosecutorial offices are at now and going even further. It really shouldn't be a Republican-Democratic issue because, as you know, having practiced, every case is different. Every person comes in differently. Everybody needs to be treated based on them, what they've done, criminal history, victims. Looking at it individually, we shouldn't sweep everybody into a category.
I understand. Well, we appreciate your time. We want to give you the final opportunity to talk to the voter.
Thank you.
When did voting start, right? Or
It starts early voting starts tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
We're taping on the 25th, 26th
26th?
of September is early voting.
So have at it. Tell the voters why they should vote for you.
Thank you. I recently had a Daily Herald endorsement interview, And one of the things that I comment in it is how much I appreciated their non-endorsement of me when I was running against Bob Spence, of whom I have great respect for. He was a tried and true prosecutor. And what they said in that was, because of his experience, they're endorsing him, but that he should take my ideas. Now I have the experience on top of the experience I had before, and I've implemented my ideas. And we have shown throughout these years that these are working, that we are actually making a difference, that we are making our community safer every single day. So what I'm asking the voters is to vote for me, because I have the experience. I've shown what I can do over these last 4 years, and I have so many more ideas just to make Kane County better, and that I will continue to do so. So I ask very humbly for their vote.
Madam
Very
State's
nice.
Attorney, we want to thank you,
Thank you.
for joining us on our
Thank you very
podcast
much.
today. Jimmy Masser, the State's Attorney for Kane County, has been our guest, and we're going to take a small break. When we return, we're going to have her opponent, Andrew 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐞, here with Pat and I. You stay tuned.
Want to save on some of the biggest names in streaming on the network made for streaming? X marks the spot. Now you can add the new Xfinity Stream Saver that includes Netflix, Peacock, and Apple TV+. That's Xfinity Stream Saver for just $15 a month. All your favorites, all in one place. Only from Xfinity. For more watching and less spending, X marks the spot. Do it all on the network made for streaming, and bring on the good stuff.
All right, we're back, and we're here with the challenger for the Kane County State's Attorney's Office race, Mr. Andrew 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐞. We want to thank you for coming, giving us your time. We appreciate that. Ray is here. He's excited to meet you. I, of course, have known you, and we talked about that a little bit. Stay away from the table, you're telling me, Kevin? Thank you. First thing we wanted to do for the people that don't necessarily know who you are is to give the people a little bit of your background, your past employment history, your educational background, and of course any websites you might have where people can just take their time and lollygag through your vast curriculum vitae.
Well, very nice. So first of all, thank you very much, Pat, for having me, and Ray. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to talk to your audience, and I hope I can inform them. My name is Andrew 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐞. My website is 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐿𝐴𝐛YforKane.com. I've been an attorney for 35 years. I graduated from law school in 1989, so that makes it 35 years. And I've done a lot in that 35 years. I would say probably half of that, though, I've been involved in some kind of prosecution. I also include my time as Deputy General Counsel of DCFS in the prosecution element, because I was prosecuting cases for DCFS, mostly child abuse cases around the state of Illinois. I've probably prosecuted in probably, 60 of the 102 counties we have in the state of Illinois in some capacity or another. But mainly, as far as a prosecuted with actual caseload, I've been in Kane County, where I was there for about a little over 8 years. Had the fortune of working with Pat, and I'm saying that very, very truly because he was one of those persons we all looked up to in the office. He had a lot of experience and was always willing to give that to everybody there. And that's what you need in a prosecutor's office, that experience to give the young prosecutors something to look at and to emulate. So we had that opportunity. I also prosecuted in McHenry County up north, also in Joe Davis County way out west in Galena, and rounding it out, I was in Ogle County in Oregon, Illinois. Those last assignments, Oregon and Ogle, I did a lot of prosecution of their high criminal cases. These were young prosecutors that were just elected. They didn't have any experience. They said, "Can you come out and help us?" And I did work for them. I did several murders, sexual assault cases. I remember one huge pornography case, cases like that, and also civil cases. I was appearing for they were trying to do windmills out in Galena. I remember appearing at the county board for those hearings.
Were you pro or against windmills?
Probably at that time it was pretty new, the whole idea. So we were looking at like scientific evidence to determine if it was going to kill the birds and was going to be this and that. So I remember just trying to be an arbiter of facts, bringing them in. At this point, I'm not even sure what I believe anymore. I think that electric energy is good, but it needs a lot of help.
Sure.
So the other thing I've done is the other crown jewel probably in my experience is I was the general counsel for the National Insurance Crime Bureau. The reason I bring that up is an organization that dealt with white collar crime. It was mostly auto theft and high level crimes of insurance. They were involving like the mafias. These were like Russian mafias that were coming from other countries. We would work with search warrants with police, Interpol, interstate police, FBI, CIA. So we had a lot of contacts with all those agencies. And I ran the legal services for the United States of America, all 50 states. We had lawyers in every state. We had cases in every state, as you can imagine. And it was a budget of about maybe $60 million that we did. And my specific department was about a little over 6.5, maybe something like that. Then I'm also a private lawyer. I have my own practice in Elgin. Have a little boutique practice, a couple paralegals, some interns that we use. And then rounding out that experience, thank goodness, I've been a teacher, adjunct professor at Elgin Community College for about 23 years now. I started in 2000, teaching criminal law. You did some of that. I remember that as well, Patrick. Criminal law, criminal justice, report writing for police officers, also both in the paralegal studies program and in the criminal justice program. And then most recently, I got an assignment at Aurora University as a full-time senior lecturer, they call it. They don't allow me to say professor because I don't have a PhD. I only have a JD, a Juris Doctor. You can't be a professor unless you have a JD. And I don't have unless you have a PhD, and I don't have a PhD.
That seems wrong, and we're going to work on that.
Yes, but I'm trying my best every day over there.
Andrew, you're the challenger, Republican challenger in
Yes,
this
sir.
particular case, and I guess the simple question is, what motivates you to challenge the incumbent state's attorney?
Well, I think, Ray, thank you for that question. I think it's a lot of this has to do with what I see happening in laws around the state of Illinois. And we're going to talk probably some more about that, like the advent of the Safety Act. And when I'm in classes, I talk to students. These are young kids, 20 years old, 19, 18, who want to be law enforcement officers. And we talk about prosecution. We talk about the old days of prosecution. We talk about the idea of holding people accountable. And we talk about also protecting our law enforcement. And these all want to be law enforcement officers. And a true story, one day, 2 kids come up to me after class and said, "Why don't you run as the state's attorney?" And I said, well, I've thought about that through my life. We all think about those things. You just want to, where you're going to pick up your bootstraps and do it. So I said, why don't you put me on the ballot? I was just kind of saying that. I went back up and wrote on the board. The next day, they're bringing petitions in and they're passing it around. They say, "Professor, we only have like 16 days or something to get you on the ballot." It was like late December or late November. So I said, go ahead. So we started doing that. The next thing I do, I contacted the party. So why am I running? It's number one, because there's an impetus behind the students were saying we need to do this. But number two, as you look around our communities, the climate and the fabric are changing. And I'm not saying that anybody's doing it purposely. It's not a big conspiracy theory, but you gradually see some things happening. And my children live in this county. My grandchildren live in this county. And a lot of friends and neighbors. And I said, we got to do something about it. I'm going to be 64 years old. Hey, this could be the last thing I do before I retire.
What would you do differently, at least in practice, with the programs that exist currently in the state's attorney's office? What might you do differently? Maybe a couple, 3 items that you would see as a challenger. And this is a campaign, so we can talk about differences. What would you do differently?
Well, probably number one, this is going to sound trite and it's going to sound funny, but it's really not. It's actually kind of pathetic. But I would actually try cases. The chief law enforcement prosecutor of the county, if you look at the statute, it's pretty clear. The statutory duties of a prosecutor is to prosecute cases. Wow, can you believe that? That's a huge confusion. And prosecuting cases means getting into court sometimes and prosecuting a case. And when you prosecute cases and you teach these young prosecutors how to prosecute and how to do cases, the offers or the ability to hold people accountable for crimes begins to go up. We saw that in our administration when we were there. The more you are aggressive about doing that, the more you hold people accountable for crime. So that's number one. Number two is I would do a deep dive into a lot of the social justice programs that the state's attorney's office currently employs. Now, I'm not saying they're bad, so don't say, oh, they're horrible. But again, I think before off camera, Ray, you had mentioned statistics. And somebody, where are statistics? I can look at an 8x5 glossy and say, oh, we're doing such a great job. But the bottom line is when you get into the nitty gritty, there's really no details. And I would like to find out, are these programs really working? You could say all you want, and I've not seen any statistical data to say that diversion programs or what's happening now are truly working. You might have one guy, oh, he graduated, he's doing great. But I want to see statistical data to say that the money we're spending and employing is huge. The last thing I'd probably do is really look at the civil division. The civil division is it's unwatched. As prosecutors, everybody wants to come in and try the murder cases. We all like that. It's sexy, it's appealing, it has the most pump. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the civil division. And I've talked to civil division lawyers who are there right now, and there's some concerns. One example was just recently we had a First Amendment zone that the state's attorney...
We talked about that last week.
Yeah, and allegedly this First Amendment zone, and I just got into the facts on it. The First Amendment zone was created, but it was created by the state's attorney's office. And then afterwards, the state's attorney said, well, I didn't mean that. I meant something. It was just a big confusion. Like, well, who's on first? Right. Does the prosecutor know what's going on?
Actually, we talked to the chair and the Mr. Bell, her opponent, on that. Do you believe that people should be able to enter and exit county offices freely without interference?
Well, I believe that if anything obstructs an ability for a business to do their business, it's a concern.
All right.
And that's not protected by the First Amendment. I mean, that's just ridiculous. So if something's affecting the ability of somebody to do their work,
right?
You gotta employ some kind of.
And the follow up to that is actually, if there is a problem over there, whose responsibility is it to stop that problem?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's a collective, probably, decision, but it starts with just talking about the problem and solving it. And when you look at the chief, like what I would look at in my role, Ray, is I find that the state's attorney is the chief defense attorney for the county. So I represent the county board, I represent the chairman of the board, and I will do that. And one of the things my opponent says is, well, I can give them advice and they don't listen to the advice. Well, you know what? When I have clients that don't listen to my advice, you know what I say? Get another lawyer. And county board, here's the other lawyer you can get because I'm ready to stand up and defend you and fight for you.
On that First Amendment issue, though, I don't want to belabor this point, but if there's some kind of confusion or whatever out front, and it causes a disturbance of some sort, at the end of the day, shouldn't the sheriff be taking care of that?
Yeah, the sheriff should. I mean, again, everybody has their role. I mean, if there is somebody truly violating a law, again, if there's something put up and somebody's going beyond it, the sheriff should probably get involved. If there's a breach of the peace and the ability of that goes to that level, then certainly the sheriff's going to get involved. But sometimes we kill ants with sledgehammers. So the big thing is take all the people in a room and talk about this and say, what can we do to, number one, preserve your rights and protect your ability to speak. Number two, keep our business flowing. Number three, allow people to do their work. It's when you sit down, you can solve these problems.
One last point on
Yes,
this before Pat's got some questions as well.
Of course.
And that is with respect to the office itself, and you outlined the fact that you were there a number of years ago. Mm-hmm. And you, as running for office, you've obviously done some study on the office and so on.
Yes, sir.
What differences exist today from when you were there?
Well, number one, the laws are completely different. There's changing laws all over the place, and a lot of these laws are mandates. That you have to do certain things, and there's grandfathered in, and you got certain things coming at certain times. So there's a legal climate that's different. But really, the bottom line is it's the same thing. You're trying to mitigate criminal activities. So the same thing that went back 100 years ago is going on today. You're trying to mitigate criminal activities. You find abhorrent behaviors, you make them criminal, and you want to hold people accountable so they don't do it again. So there's not a lot of change in philosophy as far as that's what you want to do. It's just a matter of how you're doing it. I think right now there's a lot of diversion programs. There's a lot of programs for second chance, maybe third chance, maybe fourth chance. I don't know enough about the programs, but I know there's an inordinate amount of money being spent. My opponent, for example, started with a budget of about $5 million, and I think it's 11 now, or maybe even 12. And that's in 3.5 years. That's an over doubling of a budget. That's kind of almost obscene.
If I may, she was here earlier, as I said, and she said her budget's 18. She came in at 10. That's what she said today.
That's one of her, and I don't have the actual numbers.
No, I understand.
So but even if that, let's say she's right, and it's 10 and it goes to 8, that's still almost doubling a budget. That's $8 million, and a lot of it's saying we have to pay for the Safety Act. Well, that's another whole story I'm going to get you. The taxpayers need to be concerned about these things, and public safety is number one. I mean, there's no money budget on public safety, but we got to do things smart.
I've known you long enough, and you've certainly laid out your background in terms of your prosecutorial history and tenure throughout the state. I would imagine you were always kind of a compassionate, empathetic type guy. You weren't, you didn't have foam at the mouth when you were a prosecutor. Some of this restorative justice, I think that you can understand where that comes from. But have they gone too far? And when I say they, maybe the progressive people in the Democratic Party or the office of the state's attorney in terms of some of these diversion programs.
Yeah, and thank you for that question, Pat. Back in the 90s when I was a prosecutor for juvenile justice, if you may recall, I was one of the authors of the Juvenile Court Act when they rehauled the act. And I brought restorative justice in there. Isn't that weird? Right. It was a concept that nobody talked about, but it was basically bringing the offender with the victim and the community and solving the problem. There's good with that. That's very good. I mean, I think that that's a good step. But like you said, has it gotten out of control? Sometimes I look at this, and which is one of the reasons, Ray, I'm involved in the campaign, is that the criminal justice system is kind of turning upside down on its head. And the victims are secondary to the defendant. We believe in the United States Constitution. I think we all do. And there's the 10 amendments to the Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights, which gave a plethora of rights to individuals to make sure they're not downtrodden and they're not subjected to punishments when they shouldn't. And there's a lot of laws that protect that. But now we're almost going even further on that. And, there's victims' bills of rights, but it seems like victims are secondary. In my administration, that's another thing I would look at is victims are number one. Now, that sounds like you're pandering to, no, we're not. I mean, a victim should be number one. What's going on? We don't want this to happen. That's why we have criminal justice, to prevent it from happening to other people. So yes, has it gone too far? And I'll tell you an example when we talk about the Safety Act. If you want to ask me that, I will.
Well, we'll get to that, I think, but going back to some of these restorative programs, I was pretty hard on Ms. Mosser as it relates to some of these programs because, this pre-arrest diversion where we don't even want somebody to be booked, God forbid, or some of these other programs. It seems as though we are spending a lot of time on the defendant and not so much time on the victim. And that seems to be at cross purpose you talked about the statute and what our duties and responsibilities are. It should be victim centric.
Let me quickly get in this before I know you want to go to the referendum coming up, but we asked her the same question, so I'll ask you. We did this in all of our various interviews with opponents. We want to try to keep the campaign to be kind of mellow, and so I'll ask the question: is there something good you want to tell the audience about your opponent?
Yes,
something you like about her.
Well, I actually went on somebody sent me her website or something, and she has a beautiful picture of her family. It looks like she has a very supportive husband. She's got supportive children. So she's got a husband that's behind her and children are behind her, and I think that that's beautiful.
Okay.
I will say that when we interviewed the county board candidates, there was talk of this sales tax that's going to be in a referendum in the spring. I believe it was 0.75%, Ray, is that correct? Something like that?
Yeah. 3/4 of a penny.
And the money was dedicated strictly to public safety. And the county board candidates talked about the $28 million shortfall in the budget currently. And the idea that if the referendum doesn't pass, they've got a shortfall and they're going to have to make some serious decisions. Do you support the referendum at this point? Obviously, it's not up until the spring, bless you. And do you, if it doesn't pass and you win this election, you have an obligation then to work with the county board to maybe reduce employees or other aspects of the office. Where do you see yourself in that process?
And that's a great question.
Yeah.
And there's probably about 3 or 4 in there. So let me try to tackle that. Number one, I'm not afraid to use the big scissors. I've done that as a general counsel for an organization that had a huge budget, and we would often sit down and have to cut certain things that we want to do. Whenever I would go to cutting, it would never be at the expense of public safety. But you know what I got to tell you, Pat? Public safety is a beautiful word.
Sure.
Like the Safety Act. Everybody loves to say public safety. So if I say no to it, it sounds like I'm like I got horns and a tail.
Sure.
Safety Act. If you say no to, well, you want to have safety, it sounds like you got horns and a tail. The devil's in the detail. And what is the Safety Act? What is the referendum funding when it talks about public safety? I submit to you and to your listeners and watchers that the budgets are bloated all over the county. The reason they're in a shortfall, again, now I'm a Republican candidate, so I'm much more fiscally conservative maybe than other people may be. And I think you need somebody like that in the room. You have a state that's run by one party and they're spending out the ears. And whose money are they spending? Yours and yours and yours and mine.
If I may, though,
Yes.
and I brought this up here with the county board chair and her opponent, the tax rate for the county has dropped the last 4 years. It hasn't increased at all. I'm not suggesting, I'm not challenging your answer at all. I'm just simply saying, I'm raising a question for you to answer. Has the county been diligent with their budgets, pandemic and afterwards, up to this particular point in time?
Well, whenever I hear the word shortfall, then I obviously think that there's something wrong. I mean, you don't plan a shortfall. You do things that cause a shortfall. So I'm not going to say I want a shortfall. I plan things. As far as the tax rates, there's the variables that are used to determine taxes, and those have changed a lot over the years. They've changed. So is really the tax rate change, or are we changing the variables? I mean, there's a system bill, I think it's 33%, it goes back and forth. I mean, so they do some crazy stuff with those numbers, so I'm not sure.
And if I may,
Sure.
they I know this full well because we did it at the city of St. Charles for a while too, and that is they froze the levy. Not this chair, but the previous year froze the levy. Well, when you do that, you leave a lot of money on the table. And so shortfalls, I suppose, can occur. Pat, in the previous interview, talked about bringing the state's attorneys here in Kane County up to par with other counties. And so admittedly, there's been expenditures in that particular budget to bring the lawyers, the prosecutors, in a competitive mode with the DuPage County prosecutors and the Lake County prosecutors, etc. I just throw that in there as a...
But we also talked about the difference between DuPage County and Kane County in terms of revenue. So they have a little more money.
Lawyers
to
go
deal with.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Lawyers go somewhere.
The other thing that's compounding this issue, gentlemen, that I see, at least when I'm reading, and again, I'm not an expert, so please, when it talks about county referendums and tax things, I know enough to be at least informed. But there's a lot of concerns also about the population of the county going down. If you saw that, the last census, there's a significant number of people moving out. Either they're not saying that they're here. We're also getting an influx of people who are undocumented. So you have expenses coming from undocumented individuals. That's another whole subject. It's probably a can of worms, and we're not going to go down this conversation, but I'd be happy to come back and give you my true thoughts on that. But the bottom line on that is that there's issues going on with Aurora. I think the population went down by 60,000 or something. It's just in a north. I don't know if it's that much.
I don't know.
Yeah, but it's gone down. So when you have monies and you have shortfalls of people and you don't have a lot of income, you're going to have some deficits. So go ahead.
No, one of the other things that I wanted to talk about is I think you're telling us that you're going to look at the monies, the budget when you get in. That's certainly something that anybody would do. Have you had occasion to look at the staffing in the office as it's currently managed in terms of supervisors and supervisors per capita or per assistant state's attorney? You know, obviously you were a supervisor when you were with the state's attorney in Kane County. You understand what that role is, but can an office have too many? And
Oh, yeah.
Have you looked at this office? Do you have an opinion about it?
Yeah, I've not looked a deep dive on it. Again, that would be something I would do. A lot of these records are not something that's easy to get. I could FOIA them and get these things, but to be honest with you, a lot of other things are going on. But what I will tell you is I've heard, as well, and I've seen, I've seen a bloated, administrative staff and also staff of supervising attorneys. It can be much leaner, and we saw it when we were in the state's attorney's office. You don't want to sound like your dad, like, well, remember the old days. But I mean, there's a lot of good things that happened in those days that we could model and that they could learn from. And when you see a lot of these people going through it, you don't have a lot of that institutional knowledge, which I will bring back to that office to make the place leaner and efficient. Efficiency is what it's about. It's not about paying people that you like or providing opportunities. You got to have some of that growing in there. You got to have people ability to climb the ladders and get up to the ranks. But a bloated administrative staff and a bloated supervisory staff does not serve the public well. And that's what you're trying to do, serve the public. I want to see prosecutors get paid good wages. I do. I'm much in favor of that. I think when I was there, it was horrible too.
I can concur.
Yeah. I mean, I had some real trouble raising family with the salary that you have. So it's deplorable. And you want to make sure people have a good wage and a good living wage. But it doesn't come by keep asking for more money and then building programs and asking for, the next thing you got an $18 million budget and it was formerly 10, and in 3.5 years, I mean, you got to take a breath here and back up and say, we need some priorities. My priorities is to take care of the staff, that are doing work for prosecution, which is what the charter is that I'm doing. Pay these prosecutors that have been there for a long time, that are experienced, that have the knowledge and the ability to do the cases. Give them the money they deserve to do.
Right.
The Safety Act, which we alluded to, and we said we were going to talk about it. Full disclosure, Pat and I, for the better part of a year prior to the passage of that act on these podcasts, railed against the proposal. We didn't hide our thoughts. We were emotional about it, and we thought it was bad law. The current state's attorney said the same thing in her interview.
Today?
No, she not today. She said that at the time it was proposed, she went on the record as saying it was bad law.
Well, I can show you other than that.
Well, let me just say to you that quoting today now, the fact that you had a Daily Herald article came out, and State's Attorney Reinert in Lake County, State's Attorney Berlin in DuPage County, State's Attorney Masser here in Kane County, all said it's much better than we expected. Number one, I'd make that point as a generality.
Are they all up for re-election?
Well, Masser is. I don't know about the other two.
I think they all are.
Oh, that may be what we'd be. Then I come across this mailing.
We're going to let you get to your point.
I come across this mailing by Representative Ugasti, who says the implementation of the Pretrial Fairness Act, which went into effect in September of 23, has sparked significant concern among citizens and law enforcement. The act had left communities vulnerable and undermined the authority of the courts to hold dangerous criminals accountable for their crimes. He quotes no statistics at all in the memo about whether crime is up in Kane County, down in Kane County, level in Kane County. I offer you a chance to react to all of that.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that question. I probably have 2 days to talk about that. Number one, Dan Ugasti, great representative, always has a good thing to say. So when I hear him saying that, I respect what he's saying because he obviously might not have the statistical data, but he obviously looked at it. So let me talk about my own position on this. I think the Safety Act is horrible law. And it was passed in the middle of the night, which tells you a lot right there. Without any prosecutors or any people that were really in law enforcement even looking at it. When I don't want somebody to do something, I used to hand my paper in, I would hand it in like nobody's looking because you don't want anybody to see it. But as soon as it gets under a microscope, it's Swiss cheese all over the place. Now let me back away and say this. My opponent has been on the record saying she supports the Safety Act, and then she's been on the saying that it's bad law, and then so I don't really know.
That was before it was created.
Yeah,
I don't, to be clear.
And I think-
we can watch the tape. That's
Sure.
what she said.
If I may, if I'm correct, I think she was against it with Sheriff Hayne originally, and then they became in favor of it.
Yeah, I think so. Well, here's what I know, and I don't want to speak for my opponent because I don't know what's in her brain. But what I could tell you is this: the Safety Act is bad law, and the moment I come into the office, with God's will and grace, if I get to be your next Kane County State's Attorney, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call the governor's office and ask to put a moratorium on the Safety Act. We do it on other laws that are bad. So what I say is, why practice on our time? The state's attorney, I've heard her say that there's problems with it and we need to correct it. We've had 2 codicils already. These are called, what do they call them, bills that are coming back in after that there's a problem, and they keep trying to fix something. It's back in the days, like my mother used to say, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. So they're trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, and they continue to do these things. And these little fixes they have are still a problem. Now let me tell you why it's a problem. I don't agree completely with Mr. Gasty's statement, because it said something about the end result. This is pre-trial. We're talking about really the Pre-Trial Fairness Act, which was only one component of the Safety Act. There's so many of them, and so many of them are bad. But this is just one bad element of it. And this bad element says this: in order to reduce racism, which we all want, we don't want racism in our system. I think it disgusts me. Racism disgusts me. And also holding anybody who's different, LGBTQ, or if you're non-binary and you're treating somebody different because of anything other than the facts and the law and criminal acts, it disgusts me. Mm-hmm. And we see it sometimes, but is this law something that's going to correct it? Well, number one, if you go to Cook County, and I don't know the statistics, so you're going to say, well, what about the statistics? Statistics, where they can say anything they want. But if you look at the statistics, I believe in Cook County, it's not really solving that issue. There's still an inordinate amount of, a disproportionate amount of black and brown people that are being charged and incarcerated than non-black and brown people. You look at now, this is a Cook County law. It might be great for Cook County. So put a moratorium on 101 counties around the state and let Cook County continue this law. We have other laws that just say it's only good for 1 million and above, so that means it's Cook County. Why not do it for this law? And here's why I'm telling you, I've never seen our jails, disproportionate with black or brown people. In Kane County, and I've been watching these things. I didn't see DuPage County. I don't see Joe Davis County. I don't see Ogle County. I don't see the 60 other counties. I never saw these problems that people are creating like this is a big problem. And here's the problem with this to begin with: is when you have a Safety Act and you take away bail, it destroys the system. And let me tell you why. This is my own thing. So bear with me for a second. When they had cash bail, a person would get arrested and they would get cash bail. Let's say it's an indigent person without a lot of money, and they burglarized a building, and the judge says $5,000 bond. You need to post 5%, 10% of that $500. Oh, I don't have $500. Go to jail. The person would go to jail. Then they would have a lawyer, which is, again, a constitutional. Gosh, wow, the United States Constitution provides for a lawyer. They get a free lawyer. The lawyer comes in and talks to that individual. They say, I got to get out of here. The lawyer files maybe another bond motion with a different judge. The judge now reduces it maybe to $2,500. So $2,500 or $250 they need. They still say, I don't have enough money. Well, here's what's going to happen. Then they're going to come to me as the prosecutor, the defense attorney, and say, can we work this out? Can we now put a plea through? He'll admit to his guilt on this. He'll get a sentence. He'll be held accountable for his behavior, and he goes on his way, and the case is done. Right now, what happens is the guy gets out. You can't find him. You got to first, some judges will say, issue a summons. The summons goes out there. They can't find the guy. He comes back. Now you got a warrant out. The guy comes back and the warrant says, I'm not going to do it again. They go back, and you can't even rearrest him on a technical violation. It has to be a new violation. So they're encouraging this. It's insane.
Is it regressive though? I guess that's a simple economics question.
Regressive in what way, sir?
Against the poor.
Is what, the act or bail regressive? Okay.
I think that anything that it would be regressive if there wasn't anything that was available to them beyond this. But there's alternatives. The system is fraught before the Safety Act, fraught with abilities to go back and contest the bail. Again, to have a public defender to work the case out. It's not regressive.
But we would concede, just a point, we would concede that a rich person is no problem.
Well, a rich person has also the ability to get a great lawyer. So we're going to
I
say
understand all that.
everybody only needs to get a public defender. I'm sorry,
exactly.
It's not fair.
Of course,
it's not fair.
That's why I asked the question of whether it's regressive or not.
So I say to you,
Simple
so if you got a lot of money, the guy's got a lot of money. Let's make a law that says this. This is the new Safety Act, Safety Act 2. If you got a lot of money, you can't use that money to buy a lawyer. You got to get a public defender because it's not fair to everybody else. So we're all going to get public defenders. You're all going to be treated equally. There are some things in the system.
Nothing wrong with everybody being treated equally, is there?
No, there's not. But I mean, it would be bad if that was the way we're treating people equally by saying we're going to take away something that you have the ability to do. It's a cost benefit.
I think I may have misspoke. I think that Sheriff Hayne and Jamie Mosser were in favor of it. Then they became opposed to it. I don't know if I said that the opposite before. Just, I want to clarify.
I know that, and she said prior to the act being passed, this you can roll the tape.
Right.
She said that she was against the Safety Act. Period.
Yeah.
She said that, and then, and she quoted the article now is with Berlin and Riker in support of segments of it. You have to read the article.
I'm not the guest here, so I won't testify.
Moving along.
But anyways, but the problem is, correct me if I'm wrong, is that people are being released without bond and reoffending. Now that's not necessarily a problem in Kane, but in DuPage and Cook, there are people that have been released on multiple charges reoffending. And that's the issue. But that presupposes that they have a bond and then they're kept. I think the problem that they were trying to avoid is these people sitting in custody for months and months and months on $1,000 or $500. You remember in Kane, we used to have people go to the jail and work out something on a bond.
That's what I'm saying.
Not necessarily a plea bargain.
Very
but
efficient, very efficient. That you can have this justice can be very efficient. Sometimes it was a plea bargain. Sometimes it was moving that person out, and they had that ability to do that. You can't do that anymore.
Well, Cook County is a whole different animal.
It's a whole different animal.
And so you're right. Maybe it should be treated as a different
Moving
animal.
to the idea of the state's attorney working with all the various law enforcement agencies here in the county, with the local municipal police office, and of course the sheriff's office. We, as you know, we recently had a flap. It became somewhat public between the mayor of Aurora and the sheriff here in the county.
Very sad.
Thank you for saying that. I agree that it was sad that something like that came to a public light. When in 8 years as mayor, I became attuned to at least our police chief working well with a couple different state's attorneys here in Kane, working very well, and discussing the fact that it's incumbent upon a good partnership to exist between state's attorney's office and the police department and all the police departments working together. Please comment, if you will, to whatever length you want to comment on that whole concept, because to me, that's crucial.
Oh, the number one. I mean, you are, as the chief prosecutor for the county, you are employed by the county. They're electing you and they're employing you to work with law enforcement to enforce the law. So if you have bad relationships with police, it's going to be damaging to people in the community. That could be victims. It also could be defendants. It's everybody. So you need a absolutely rock solid relationship. But you also need this, Ray. You need to be independent. The best prosecutors are the prosecutors who are independent from law enforcement. They don't represent law enforcement. They don't work for law enforcement. They work for the people of the county of Kane. And when the relationship between law enforcement and the state's attorney's office gets too symbiotic, if you will, and it becomes controlled, like we have right now, I would submit to you, with the state's attorney and the sheriff, there could be bad results. And the reason I'm saying that is now you say, well, what data do you have? You know, my opponent, I don't know if you knew this or saw this, but gave $10,000 to Sheriff Haynes' reelection campaign. Now, if I gave you $10,000, we would have a good relationship with each other, and maybe some would say it's a little bit too close. You know, and what ends up happening is that's what's happening. When you have this Aurora situation, I submit to your ladies and gentlemen out here that are listening is this. How is that person going to be fair in adjudicating a dispute between Aurora and the Sheriff's Department, which they're going to have to in a situation because they're the investigators, they're major crimes task force is investigating it. It's led by the state's attorney's office. Do you think that there's going to be a fair result? Now, my opponent would say, "Oh, absolutely, I'm beyond reproach." Well, I could say I'm the president of the world. I mean, I could say anything I want. The proof is in $10,000 that's being given to the sheriff. You know, the other thing is, I want to shove this in here a little bit. In Elgin, a young black man was shot and killed. I don't know if you saw this. A young black man was shot and killed in Elgin, and he was shot and killed by a civilian, but the civilian happened to be an off-duty sheriff's deputy. And the next morning, before an investigation even took place, the sheriff's on the WGN and all over the news saying, he's a hero. He shot and killed this guy. We don't even know the evidence. And the sheriff's already saying the hero. Now the state's attorney, who she gave $10,000 to, is the one that's going to be investigating that. Do you think that there's going to be anything looked at? Again, if I gave you $10,000, would you look at me a little bit nicer than if I didn't?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that she would or would not. I don't want to pass judgment on that, but you made your point, I suppose.
And I believe the state's attorney has the capacity to bring in the state police or somehow recuse themselves from the investigation.
So I submit right now to the state's attorney, we need to get an independent investigator on any situation that is controversial that's involving the sheriff's and her office, because the people of this county deserve better, and they deserve independence, not somebody that's beholden to a certain political position. And that's when my mantra I say in my campaign, it says, take politics out of the office. This is a typical example. We can't have political stuff. Does that mean I'm not going to work with the sheriff? I can't wait to work with the sheriff. I can't wait to work with Elgin, Aurora, St. Charles, all the police departments. But no one's going to control me. The people of the state of Illinois will elect me, and I will represent them.
Well, we want to, A, give you an opportunity to tell the viewers your website again, and then B, we want you to take this opportunity to speak directly to the consumer here, the viewer, just a couple of guy audience, and tell them why they should vote for you.
Well, thank you. Again, thank you very much, gentlemen. It was a very good interview, and I appreciate your questions. My name is Andrew 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐞. My website is 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐞forkane.com. I want to tell you that I'm not a newcomer. You know, I'm an older man. I'm 64 years old. I've been around the block, and I am asking to be your next Kane County State's Attorney. I'm asking you to entrust me with the ability to be fair, number one. And I'm all about social justice, so don't let anything I say make you think that I'm not for social justice. I believe we need to give people opportunities to make mistakes and then be good about trying to correct those mistakes so they don't do it again. You know, when my kids would make a mistake, the first time I would punish them. People need that, and then they would learn. If they didn't, you'd do something else. It's very similar with population of criminals and criminal behavior. You just need to hold people accountable. I am the state's attorney that is not afraid to hold anybody accountable. I'm not beholden to anybody but you, the citizens of Kane County. Again, I don't ask to look at red or blue or all this stuff going on in politics. I'm a very independent-minded man. I think very independently. I'm not somebody that's going to be controlled by any political thoughts or ideas. I'm a guy that wants to be your state's attorney. I want to do this for you. I want to do it for my family. I want to do it for your family, for your children, for your communities. And I promise you that you will have my undivided attention on that for the next 4 years if you allow me to do that.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it.
Andrew, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Andrew 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐞, the Republican nominee for the position of Kane County State's Attorney. And now we have finished our second countywide interview with the candidates. We've got one to go, and meanwhile, Pat and I will come back and discuss our afternoon here in just a moment after a word from one of our fine sponsors. You stay tuned. Hello, friends. This is Ray Rogina. Are you looking for the place to be? Voted best live music and entertainment venue by the Daily Herald in 2023? That would be Old Republic in Elgin, an indoor-outdoor hub with classic American eats, beer, and cocktails, plus the best sports bar, burgers, wings, and ribs. Best value? Old Republic. Another good place to be. Well, we're back for some closing comments on our second countywide interview of the countywide candidates for state's attorney. One, 𝐨𝐚𝐬 𝐂𝐨 and Andrew 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐞. And Pat, I'll start the ball rolling by saying I think that as a big picture item, talking to both of them, and it was a little bit refreshing in this regard compared to what we see at the national level. They respect each other.
Yeah, you want to see that too. You want to see two
Right.
people, professionals, they're
Exactly.
lawyers, obviously. They respect each other. They have different opinions. They would tackle issues differently. But yeah, deep down, they respect each other.
Exactly, and I thought that was important. Clearly, let's take just a couple items that we gleaned from the whole, conversation of both of them. The Safety Act is clearly a difference of opinion here. He really, that probably was the one part of his podcast or his interview where he really got going. Only
Right.
because he obviously thinks it's bad law. Period.
Right.
I question him on a couple of things, and of course, one of the things on the Safety Act, if I may, that has always been a criticism of beforehand is the rich can walk out, and I use as an example of this, not so much the murderer. Let's focus on domestic violence. And I know, and I've heard from you, and I've learned from you on this point that what is domestic violence? There's a lot of this various degrees, but let's take somebody who's really been abused, and they've got a rich spouse who's able to post bail quickly as opposed to somebody who's not. That's just like one example. And in fact, the article in the Daily Herald, that they did point that out, that was one of the major areas where they thought progress has really been made in this particular area. And for me personally, to read that was a positive thing. And so when he started railing on that, I got a little, I don't want to use the word unnerved, but I had to bring up the idea of regressiveness as far as a bail is concerned. And also the fact that judges are in a position for serious crimes to detain until trial under the Act. Right. And so I'll leave it at that. She, of course, has gone on record in the press saying that she's changed her mind about the Act and has some positive things to say about it.
Well, it has its problems. I don't know if the problems are so much here in Kane County as opposed to Chicago. The evidence in Chicago is legendary that people are getting released and reoffending over and over again. I think in Kane County, the judges are doing a really good job of holding the people that need to be held. Now, the question is, are they doing that without the state asking them to do it? Or does the state ask the judge to hold particular people? So either way, I think it's working here. And I think there are other parts of the Safety Act that I'm more concerned about than the bail and the detention. But I do have faith that I think the right people are being held.
With respect to the Safety Act as well, and I was a little hard on Representative Ugasti in my comments, but the reason I was is because his email made it sound like there's everything's falling apart.
Right.
The crime is rampant. And then he quotes no statistics. And I've heard you talk about it before, and I've looked at the statistics. Well, this county, by and large, the crime rate is not over the top at all.
That's correct.
It's quite low, right. And we should be very happy that we live in a county that does have solid law enforcement. Back to the Safety Act, one more point on your comment about the judges. I would only say that on any kind of serious offense that takes place, that's reported in the paper, I want to see that Judge X detained.
Right.
Detained.
I
I want to see the name of the judge they detained. I want to see that as a citizen here.
I want to see that the petition was filed to detain too.
Oh yes,
Absolutely.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I want to see all of that because if the defense of the act was back when we were railing on it a year or two ago,
Right.
the defense was, well, the judges can hold them until trial. That's fine, but I want to know that the act was serious enough to warrant the detention. And if the act, let's say it's a first-time DUI, but nobody should be sitting in jail. Release, and let's go through the process then from there.
They certainly wouldn't have been sitting in jail before the act. So, why would
Well, they would have had a post bail though, right?
Not necessarily.
Okay,
Sometimes you sign your personal recognizance.
If you got them, if you're well known, that's what personal recognizance means.
You have ties to the community,
Right.
yeah, you have a job, things like that. I think we've spent a little too much time on the Safety Act. I know that you and I talked about it for quite a while.
That's
at
why
the
I felt we
beginning.
ought to give it.
But at the end of the day, as it relates to this race and the issues involved, I think there are other things that are far more important. One of which is we've talked a little bit about Ms. Mosser's management of the office, and I don't want people to think that she's letting everybody out with a program or something. The bad guys are being prosecuted and they're being sentenced accordingly. But she does have these programs. I don't necessarily know that I would, and it appears as though Mr. 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐞 is going to evaluate the programs. He didn't say he was going to eliminate them. He said he was going to look at them and evaluate them. And so he's not adverse to the idea of restorative justice.
Well, but on programs in general, and programs do include salaries and everything else.
Yeah.
She was pretty staunch. You asked the question. She was pretty staunch in her comment that she doesn't see where to cut. She was clear on that point. I don't deny that. And she said she reverted back to where we were,
Right.
where we are now.
I would say this,
the numbers can speak for themselves.
Right.
She said what the budget increased by. People can evaluate that.
Sure.
They can also ask themselves the question as to how they feel law enforcement is in their particular communities here in the county, and go from there and their own personal experiences. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
But he was clear that the referendum did not pass. He said he'd take the scissors.
Well, I think it's an obligation for anybody who comes in, should he win and he comes into the office. You have to do an audit of the entire office, of the budget. What are our priorities? Let's look at our priorities.
You know me. I'm a fiscal conservative.
Sure, me
if there's
too.
a $25 million shortfall and there is no new revenue to offset that
Right.
or catch that,
Sure.
then you do have to cut. I don't disagree with that for a minute.
The first thing the county board should do if that referendum fails is a hiring freeze at the very least. And then maybe, give me, every department, give me an audit. I want to know, where are you at? Let's talk about it. So if that referendum fails and Ms. Mosser wins again, there's going to have to be cuts. And Mr. 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐞 talked about the fact that he would evaluate for cuts. She answered the question like there's no fat, but what else is she going to say? Is she going to say, oh yeah, I admit that there's fat in the budget? She's not going to say that.
And we don't know really and truthfully whether there is fat in the budget. We
No.
can sit unless we're sitting here with a pen and we have the numbers in front of us.
No.
And this is a podcast where we're more broad based in general.
Sure.
I don't want to lay any criticism on anybody without specificity in the facts.
No, I thought they both did a good job, but I thought she advocated for her office, she advocated for her budget, and she stuck with it. She, despite my criticisms, she stood by her programs. Mr. 𝐊𝐴𝐧𝐞 was the same way. He was respectful of her, respectful of the job, but he did indicate that he would evaluate it, which is the smart thing.
My final comment would be this: I think both of them are well qualified. We start at the beginning by them outlining what they've done, and both have tremendous resumes, in my opinion, to get the job done. So you friends listening to us have an opportunity to make a decision now based upon some interaction with the candidates. And we encourage you to go to other forums where they'll appear to have further conversation. My guess is that they're going one-on-one against each other in a forum, unlike this format. It might be a little bit more interesting. Well, it might be, because...
Are you saying it wasn't interesting here?
All I'm saying is, somebody says something over here, this person is in a position to rebut.
Right.
That's my point.
Right.
Well,
that's the nature of our forum here, is that there's separate interviews. If we had them at the same chair, the same table.
And I'm not sure I want to take that on specifically. I like our format, but I do encourage our listeners, as you make a learned decision on your vote. And by the way, it starts tomorrow. When I say that, we're taping on Wednesday, September 26th. Early voting begins all the way through the month of November into the first week of November 5th being election day. So you've got time to make an educated decision on this race, on the other races that we're going to talk about, and all other races in general. Be an educated voter.
And we gave out the websites, so they can certainly go to the websites, do any research you can on the Google machine to look at what they've said on the other forums. And obviously there's time, if you don't want to vote tomorrow, there's time to continue to research the issues, and there are many. And we also noticed, I think, the intertwining of this office and the county board office, and we might see that with the judges a little bit too. It's all the same kind of money. It's all the same kind of a problem. You know what I mean? So they're all related, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, the three branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary.
That's
We're covering it all. What more could you ask for, friends? Well, the supper hour is upon us, and I know my wife has prepared a nice meal for me upstairs.
The smell is filling the room.
Diana's soup of some sort.
We're getting hungry over here.
Yes. Okay.
What is it? Is it a nookie? What do they call that? What kind of soup?
Meatball soup.
Meatball soup. I've never heard of that.
Well, that's why.
So it consists of meatballs, and then you've got some other stuff.
Kevin,
Diane's going to have a
he's
cooking
rolling
show.
away here.
She's going to
of
have
course, we
a
like this little banter, but it's time for us to
the
close it
cooking
out.
hour. Yeah.
So,
Yes.
well, why don't you see if you can do that?
I can't do it.
You can't do it?
I can't do it justice.
All right, then I'll do it. For our crafty cinematographer and, of course, the publisher of Fox Valley Magazine.
And dressed appropriately for security.
Dressed for security.
Okay.
But we invite him next time to come down here, and maybe he can wear a sport coat.
Yeah.
Kevin Ketchum, Lord God, you do a great job, and Paul should be doubling your salary. Speaking of salary increases.
Well, the new year is coming up.
Exactly. Maybe somebody else will get a salary bump.
The fiscal. Yeah.
For my distinguished, and I think he showed his distinguished prowess today, because he was in his arena as an attorney.
That's right.
He was in the arena, and he showed his prowess. My friend, my partner, Pat Crimmins. This is Ray Rogina wishing you all a pleasant week. And remember, we're going to say it one more time. And you're right. They don't have to vote tomorrow, even though early voting starts tomorrow.
That's right.
They should vote after they decided these are the people we want, based upon your research.
A lot of things can happen between tomorrow and Election Day.
Boy, I guess so.
Yeah.
I guess so.
A scandal.
National, state, or local.
That's right.
Ray Rogina wishing you all a pleasant week, and we'll see you soon with the judges and other fine programming. Thanks to... well, it is fine programming. Thanks to State's Attorney Jamie Mosser. Thanks to Andrew Sadnowski. We'll see you soon. Pat and Ray.
Pat and Ray and Pat.
Just a couple of guys. So long, everyone.